There's a silent kind of power that doesn't come from confrontation, argument, or even revenge. It comes from absence, from the quiet withdrawal of energy, validation, and emotional reaction. For a narcissist, that silence is unbearable because their entire psychological survival depends on reflection, the constant emotional mirror that confirms they exist, that they matter, that their illusion is working. When that mirror disappears, when you no longer reflect their importance back to them, you begin the quiet unraveling of their identity. A narcissist's sense of self is not self-created. It's borrowed. Every smile they fake, every story they exaggerate, every charm they project, it's all designed to see themselves reflected in the admiration or fear of others. They don't live from the inside out, they live from the outside in. They need eyes watching them, voices approving them, emotions reacting to them. Your energy becomes their mirror. Your attention, even your anger, becomes proof that they still have influence. And as long as you reflect them positively or negatively, they remain powerful. But what happens when the reflection disappears? When you stop engaging, stop reacting, stop explaining yourself, and start existing independently of their drama? What happens when you choose peace over performance? It's not just rejection they feel, it's psychological death. Because in that silence, they are forced to face a reality they've spent their lives running from without external validation. They don't know who they are. For the narcissist, losing reflection is like losing gravity. Their sense of superiority, charm, and importance begins to float aimlessly without an emotional anchor. You see, narcissism is not confidence, it's dependency disguised as dominance. True confidence is self-sustaining. It draws strength from inner worth. But narcissistic confidence collapses the moment it isn't fed from the outside. Their grandiosity is a fragile balloon, and the air inside it is your attention. Remove it, and the inflation ends. At first, they won't understand what's happening. When you pull away, they'll test the waters. They'll provoke you, ignore you, flatter you, criticize you, anything to make you react. Because your reaction, no matter how small, reassures them they still have access to your mind. If you respond, even in defense, you've given them a reflection again. They see their power restored, even if it's through conflict. That's why narcissists often prefer arguments over silence. Arguments still keep them alive in your head, but when the reflection truly disappears, when you stop reacting completely, something shifts. They start to panic. They may accuse you of being cold, ungrateful, selfish, or even cruel. They'll project their own emptiness onto you, trying to provoke guilt or sympathy. But your stillness becomes a mirror they cannot manipulate. In your silence, they're forced to look at the truth of their own emptiness. And that's the one reflection they cannot stand. Deep inside, a narcissist carries a wound, a deep, unacknowledged belief that they are unworthy of love unless they perform for it. They build their lives around avoiding that wound, using charm, manipulation, and control to construct an identity that looks powerful on the outside. But when they can no longer make you mirror back their illusion, that wound resurfaces. Every unhealed insecurity, every hidden fear of insignificance, every buried shame begins to emerge. This is why they fight so hard to regain the reflection. They can't stand the silence because the silence is honest. It shows them what they really are without others: ordinary, uncertain, incomplete. For them, attention is not just pleasure, It's survival. Without it, they start to disintegrate psychologically. Their ego loses its audience, and without an audience, the performance collapses. The moment you stop reflecting them, they begin to seek new mirrors. They'll often move toward others who are still susceptible, people who haven't yet learned how to withhold emotional energy. They'll try to replace your reflection with a new source of validation, hoping to restore the illusion that was lost. But even in that new reflection, something remains broken, because once someone stops reflecting them, it confirms their deepest fear that they are not as powerful as they believed. Your disappearance creates a crack in their image that no amount of admiration can fully seal. The memory of your silence becomes haunting. They replay the absence in their mind because it represents something they couldn't control, something that didn't bend to their manipulation, and control is their oxygen. Without it, they suffocate in their own emptiness. The beauty of disappearing your reflection is that it doesn't require anger. You don't need to expose them, attack them, or prove them wrong. You simply need to stop being their mirror. You shift your energy inward. You begin to live for your own peace, not their attention. You focus on growth instead of reaction. And that choice, that invisible withdrawal, becomes the very thing that dismantles their illusion. To understand why this breaks them so deeply, you must see how dependent their psyche truly is. The narcissist's self-image is like a mask glued to their face, one that must constantly be affirmed to stay in place. Without reflection, the mask starts to crack, and behind it lies a person who feels profoundly unseen. Ironically, the very feeling they inflict on others. The emptiness they've avoided through domination is now staring back at them. They may try to convince themselves they don't care. They'll act indifferent, posturing superiority, claiming your silence means nothing. But deep down, it does. Because indifference terrifies them. It tells them they no longer exist in your psychological space, that they've lost emotional control. And for a narcissist, that's worse than being hated. Hatred still means connection. Indifference means erasure. When their reflection disappears, they face an identity crisis. Without someone to echo their worth, they start to disintegrate emotionally. Their charm feels hollow, their superiority feels forced, and their inner critic, the one they silence through external praise, becomes loud again. They'll attempt to drown it out with distractions, validation, or new relationships, but nothing replaces the specific mirror they once had, because what they lost wasn't just attention, it was control over perception. The more you stay silent, the more they unravel, not because you've punished them, but because you've stopped playing their psychological game. They can't find themselves through you anymore, and they can't find peace within themselves. The reflection they once relied on is gone, and with it, their sense of identity begins to fade. Silence becomes the greatest mirror, one that reflects nothing but truth. And that truth is something a narcissist has spent their whole life running from. Without your reflection, they meet themselves for the first time, and what they see isn't power, but the emptiness beneath the performance. That's why your absence isn't just rejection, it's revelation. Charm is the narcissist's most deceptive weapon. It is not warmth, not authenticity, not connection. It is strategy disguised as personality. It's the mask they wear to disarm suspicion, to lure admiration, to build a stage on which their illusion feels real. In the beginning, their charm feels magnetic, intoxicating even. They know exactly what to say, how to act, what emotion to imitate to make you feel seen. But what they are truly doing is studying you, understanding your needs, your insecurities, your hopes, so they can later use them as tools of control. Their charm isn't real connection, it's camouflage. For a while, this illusion works flawlessly. The narcissist's charisma casts a spell over perception. Their smile hides manipulation, their confidence hides fragility, their eloquence hides dishonesty. People confuse their performance for authenticity because charm mimics truth. It imitates empathy, kindness, intelligence, and vulnerability. But underneath that performance, there is calculation. They are not being honest, they are being effective. Yet, truth has a way of surfacing. It doesn't shout, it doesn't compete, it simply reveals. The moment truth becomes louder than their charm, the illusion begins to fracture. You start to notice the subtle inconsistencies. The way their words don't match their actions, the way apologies sound rehearsed, the way their concern feels conditional. You begin to feel the emotional hollowness behind their grand gestures. The warmth that once felt genuine now feels strategic. And it is in this quiet awakening that their charm loses its power. When you start seeing through the performance, the narcissist senses the shift instantly. They can feel when their charm no longer hypnotizes you. At first, they'll try to turn the volume up. More flattery, more sweetness, more exaggerated concern. They'll act as if they're evolving, becoming more vulnerable, more emotionally open. But this is simply their way of repairing the mask. They're not being honest, they're adapting. They study your reactions to see what kind of truth you want to hear so they can mimic it convincingly. But truth cannot be faked indefinitely. When you stand in your own clarity, their act becomes painfully transparent. You begin to recognize the patterns, the cycles of charm, manipulation, guilt, and justification. Their charisma no longer feels like magnetism, it feels like control. Their compliments start to sound like currency. Their stories begin to feel exaggerated, their emotions rehearsed. The spell that once blinded you dissolves under the light of awareness. And this is where the real unraveling begins. Because once truth becomes louder than charm, the narcissist loses their most reliable disguise. Their identity, which was built on illusion, starts to collapse. They depended on people believing their act. Once that belief fades, they're forced to face a reality they cannot manipulate. They're used to being admired for who they pretend to be, not accepted for who they are. And when that pretense no longer works, they panic. The panic doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it hides behind defensiveness, passive aggression, or sudden withdrawal. They'll say you've changed, that you've become cold, distant, or disloyal. They'll accuse you of being the problem because that's the only way they can maintain control of the narrative. To admit that their charm has failed would mean admitting that their illusion wasn't real. And narcissists don't survive self-confrontation easily. Truth, however, doesn't argue. It just stands still. When you no longer respond to their charm, when you stop being seduced by words and start watching actions, the power dynamic flips. They're no longer the center of control, you are. Your clarity becomes their exposure. The light of truth burns through the fog of flattery they once used to keep you compliant, and nothing terrifies them more than someone who sees clearly, because clarity is immunity. Their charm thrives in confusion. As long as you doubt yourself, question your memory, or crave their approval, they can maintain control. But when you begin to trust your perception again, when you start to believe your intuition over their explanations, you become untouchable. That's when they realize their manipulation can't reach you anymore. Their carefully crafted persona begins to crumble under the weight of reality, and they no longer know how to perform. You see, a narcissist's entire sense of superiority depends on convincing others that they are exceptional, morally, intellectually, emotionally, but truth is the great equalizer. It doesn't flatter, it doesn't perform, and it doesn't bend. When the truth becomes clear, it exposes their facade for what it really is: insecurity wearing arrogance as armor. Every charming phrase, every dramatic story, every self-pitying moment was a layer built to hide the core fear of being ordinary. What breaks them isn't your anger, it's your understanding. When you no longer see them as powerful, but as fragile beneath their performance, their charm loses its magic. They can't manipulate someone who sees through the illusion. They can't control someone who listens to truth instead of flattery. The spell is broken and the stage lights go out. They may try one last act, the desperate reinvention. They'll shift roles, becoming the victim, the misunderstood hero, or the reformed soul seeking redemption. They'll tell you stories of change, of self-awareness, of regret. And though part of you may want to believe it, truth remains steady. You start to recognize that genuine change doesn't need performance. It reveals itself through consistency, humility, and time. The narcissist offers words because they have no substance behind them. And when words are no longer enough, they have nothing left to give. In that moment, you understand the true difference between charm and authenticity. Charm demands attention, authenticity doesn't need it. Charm manipulates perception, authenticity aligns with truth. Charm fades when it stops being believed, authenticity endures because it doesn't depend on belief. When truth becomes louder, the narcissist's performance becomes noise, loud, exhausting, empty noise that no longer holds meaning. The collapse of their charm is also the collapse of their identity. Every lie they told, every role they played, every mask they wore was built to keep truth out. And now, truth has walked in without permission. It exposes their contradictions, their emotional dishonesty, their hidden motives. They begin to feel cornered by reality itself. There's no line left to deliver, no act left to play, no audience left to impress. The silence of truth is louder than any performance they could stage. What they experience then isn't just rejection, it's revelation. For the first time, they're not being mirrored or admired. They're being seen, not as they want to appear, but as they truly are. And for someone who's built their entire life avoiding self-awareness, that's unbearable. The light of truth doesn't just expose them to others, it exposes them to themselves. They will resist it, deny it, fight it, or flee from it, because the truth demands something they cannot offer: vulnerability. Real vulnerability means admitting weakness, facing flaws, acknowledging pain. But narcissists have buried their pain beneath layers of performance. They believe that control is safety, that charm is love, that superiority is protection. When truth becomes louder, those beliefs collapse, leaving nothing but the unguarded core they've hidden their entire life. And that's what truly breaks them. Not humiliation, not exposure, but truth. the quiet, unwavering mirror that cannot be manipulated. It doesn't need to shout. It doesn't seek revenge. It just exists, revealing everything that charm tried to hide. Once seen, it cannot be unseen. Once heard, it cannot be silenced. A narcissist spends their entire life avoiding one thing: responsibility. They live inside a psychological theater where they are always the victim, always misunderstood, always the one wronged by others. In their story, guilt belongs to everyone else. Blame is their shield, deflection is their language. As long as they can rewrite the script to make someone else the villain, they can preserve their illusion of superiority. But accountability, calm, grounded, unwavering accountability, is the mirror they cannot escape. It strips away every disguise, every excuse, every false justification. And when it finally finds them, something inside begins to crumble. Accountability doesn't always come with confrontation. Sometimes it arrives quietly through someone who refuses to be gaslit anymore, who stops defending themselves, who stands in truth instead of reaction. For the narcissist, this quiet strength is unbearable because it removes the chaos they rely on to stay in control. They can't manipulate calmness. They can't distort facts that are spoken without anger. And they can't twist reality when someone refuses to argue. Accountability isn't emotional warfare, it's clarity. And clarity is their greatest threat. When they are finally held accountable, their instinct is to escape. They will project, deflect, or distort before they will ever admit wrongdoing. You're too sensitive. You misunderstood me. I only reacted because of what you did. Every phrase is a desperate attempt to shift the weight of responsibility away from themselves. Because for them, being wrong feels like annihilation. To take responsibility would mean confronting the shame they've spent their entire lives burying. And shame, to a narcissist, is poison. It pierces the armor they've built since childhood, an armor forged to protect a fragile, unhealed sense of self. In their world, accountability feels like attack because they don't separate correction from humiliation. Their ego cannot process feedback without interpreting it as rejection. So they defend, they rage, they play the victim, they twist words until you start doubting what really happened. They'll accuse you of overreacting, of misremembering, of being manipulative yourself. This is their strategy: to exhaust your clarity until you surrender to confusion. Because if you doubt yourself, they're safe again. But if you stay grounded, if you keep the conversation rooted in facts, not emotions, the power begins to shift. It's in that stillness, that unwavering refusal to join the emotional storm, that accountability begins to land. They start to realize that their usual tactics aren't working. You're not apologizing to calm them. You're not defending yourself to be understood. You're simply observing, describing, holding space for truth. The narcissist feels this loss of control viscerally. It's like a psychological suffocation. They can't find the narrative oxygen that once kept them alive. Every attempt to manipulate backfires. Every deflection meets silence. Every lie is met with calm correction. Slowly, they begin to feel the walls of truth closing in. This is not a moment of revelation for them. It's a moment of exposure. They don't suddenly see the light of honesty and change. Instead, they panic. Accountability makes them feel small, vulnerable, and cornered. Their image of perfection starts to crack under the pressure of reality. And so they fight harder, with anger, guilt-tripping, or even charm. They'll promise to change, make grand declarations of understanding, cry, or play remorseful. But their apologies often come without transformation. They say, sorry not because they've awakened, but because they need to escape the discomfort of consequence. True accountability, however, doesn't go away with words. It lingers. It demands action, consistency, and integrity. Three things the narcissist fears the most. They can imitate empathy for a moment, but they can't sustain it. They can perform self-awareness, but they can't embody it, because genuine accountability requires humility, and humility requires the death of the false self they've built. To admit fault would mean admitting that their grand persona is not real, and that realization threatens the foundation of their entire identity. So they resist it, they run from it. They label those who hold them accountable as toxic, cold, or ungrateful. They isolate themselves from anyone who challenges their narrative. They prefer enablers over truth, tellers because enablers protect their illusion. Yet no matter how far they run, accountability has a way of following them. It appears again in new relationships, new situations, new patterns, always reflecting back the same unresolved truth. They are not as innocent as they pretend to be. The universe has a strange way of repeating lessons until they are faced. What breaks them isn't the punishment of accountability. It's the reflection of truth they can't control when someone calmly mirrors their behavior back to them without emotional entanglement. They are forced to see the gap between who they think they are and what they actually do. That gap is unbearable. It shows them how their need for dominance, admiration, and superiority has left a trail of emotional debris in others. But they can't look too long. They retreat behind denial because acknowledgement would mean feeling remorse, and remorse would mean admitting imperfection. In their eyes, being accountable feels like annihilation because their self-worth is conditional. They don't believe in redemption. They believe in image. They're not guided by conscience, but by perception. Accountability disrupts the perception of perfection they've curated. It makes them visible in their flaws, and visibility without control is their greatest fear. To be seen in truth, not through their charm, not through their manipulation, but through their actions, is to lose the power they built through illusion. Those who hold them accountable often become targets of their wrath. The narcissist will accuse, smear, or devalue them to reclaim dominance. They'll rewrite history to portray themselves as victims of unfair judgment. But deep down, the truth has already been planted. Even if they bury it under layers of self-deception, it lingers. They remember the moment they were seen clearly, the moment their excuses no longer worked, the moment someone didn't bend under their pressure. That memory becomes the seed of shame that no amount of pride can fully erase. Accountability is the mirror they spend their lives avoiding. Yet it's also the only thing that could ever free them. But freedom requires surrender, and surrender requires honesty. Until they face that, they'll continue running from others, from truth, from themselves, trapped inside the cycle of their own denial, haunted by the consequences they refuse to claim. Control is the narcissist's lifeline, not love, not connection, not understanding. What they crave above all else is the power to shape your emotions, to bend your reality until it fits their illusion. They measure their strength not by inner peace, but by how deeply they can make others react. If they can make you doubt yourself, if they can make you angry, afraid, or guilty, they feel secure. That reaction is proof of influence, and influence to them is everything. Control is their way of surviving the unbearable chaos within. From the beginning, control doesn't always appear as dominance. It often hides behind charm, concern, or even care. They make you believe they want what's best for you. Your success, your safety, your happiness. But slowly, the concern becomes conditional. It turns into subtle criticism, expectations, emotional tests, and invisible rules. You begin to notice that your peace depends on how well you manage their moods. You adjust your tone, your words, even your personality to avoid conflict. You start walking on psychological glass. That's when control has already taken root, quiet, invisible, disguised as love. To the narcissist, control is a form of oxygen. Without it, they suffocate in their own insecurity. It gives them the illusion of stability, a sense that they matter, that they exist. Every tactic, gaslighting, guilt-tripping, manipulation, withdrawal, flattery, or anger, is a thread they use to pull your emotions back into their orbit. You become the mirror reflecting their importance, the emotional puppet confirming their superiority. As long as you react, they're alive inside your mind. But the moment your emotional detachment begins, something inside them starts to unravel. When control no longer works, the narcissist faces the one experience they cannot tolerate: powerlessness. It's not just that you stopped arguing or caring about their approval. It's that your energy no longer responds to their manipulation. You stop explaining yourself. You stop chasing their validation. You stop feeding their ego with reactions. And in that stillness, they lose access to the emotional fuel that once sustained them. Your calmness becomes a mirror they can't distort, and in it, they see the truth they've always avoided, that they were never truly in control at all. The first thing they do when control begins to slip is escalate. They'll intensify their tactics: more guilt, more anger, more emotional drama. They'll try to provoke a reaction, any reaction, just to prove they still matter. They might create crises, spread rumors, or suddenly act affectionate again to lure you back. But none of it comes from love, it comes from fear. To a narcissist, losing control is not just rejection, it's psychological death. Without control, they feel invisible, irrelevant, erased. They may switch strategies entirely, from aggressor to victim. They'll act wounded, misunderstood, abandoned. They'll say you've become cold or ungrateful. They'll remind you of everything they did for you. But behind every plea for empathy is the same motive: to pull you back into their emotional game. Because if you start feeling guilty or responsible again, they regain control. That's how deeply rooted their fear of helplessness is. They would rather manipulate pity than accept equality. Control is their illusion of safety. It protects them from facing the internal chaos they carry: the fear of being insignificant, the terror of abandonment, the wound of not being enough. The more you detach, the closer they come to confronting that inner void. And that's what terrifies them. Your emotional independence acts like light shining into their darkness. It reveals how much of their confidence was built on your compliance. It exposes that without your reactions, they have no power, only emptiness. This is when they start to self-destruct. Some spiral into rage, lashing out in desperation. Others retreat into silence, hoping their absence will pull you back in. They may suddenly idealize someone new, using another person to fill the void your detachment left. It's not love, it's replacement. They are searching for a new source of control because they can't survive the stillness of being powerless. They can't live without emotional leverage, so they seek a new stage, a new audience, a new reflection. But no matter where they go, the pattern repeats. The truth is, when control no longer works, their entire identity is threatened. Every lie they told themselves, that they were powerful, desired, irreplaceable, begins to crack. They start to sense that their strength was never real, that it only existed through the reactions of others. The silence they once mocked now becomes deafening. They check your messages, stalk your presence, replay old arguments in their head. They search for any sign that they still matter. Because if you've stopped responding, they can no longer define themselves through you. They don't just lose control of you, they lose control of their narrative. They can no longer dictate how you see them, how you feel about them, or what story you tell yourself about them. That loss of psychological influence is devastating because it reveals their dependency. They weren't the master of emotion. They were the addict of attention. Every power play, every manipulation, every moment of superiority was a mask hiding their own emotional starvation. When control fails, the mask falls with it. In the quiet that follows, they begin to feel something unfamiliar, emptiness. Not sadness, not regret, but a hollow void that has always been there, now exposed. They built their entire life trying to control others so they wouldn't have to face it. Now, with no one left to manage, they are left with themselves. And that is the one person they've never learned how to control. The silence forces them to confront their own thoughts, their own loneliness, their own unhealed wounds. And there's no tactic left to escape that reality. When control no longer works, it's not just their relationship with others that breaks. It's their relationship with illusion. They begin to see that dominance was never security, that manipulation was never love, that control was never respect. The facade they built starts to tremble under the weight of truth. And though they may never admit it, deep within, they know that your detachment was not cruelty. It was liberation from their control, a silent declaration that they no longer hold the power to shape your reality.